Fabio Turone, apart from being the president of Italian Society of Journalists that cover science and the director of Center for Ethics in Science and Journalism, he is actually a board member of European Federation of Science, and actually I don't mind, but some people think this is very important. You will speak here as if you are the president. Okay, Fabio. Listen, which lovely Italian town or city do you come from? Did you come from today?
Well, I came from a beautiful city which is called Trieste, but I just stopped over here because I'm based in Milan. And in Trieste we are organizing for the next European Conference of Science Journalists. And that's why I made a lot of meetings and visited the venue. But originally I'm from Rome, which is another beautiful Italian city.
Exactly, but currently based in Milan. Okay, I went a little bit through the stories that go on in Italy or that happened there, and I found this really interesting story that relates to what we will be discussing today. It's a story about an appeal court in Turin that actually ruled that that head tumors are actually caused by mobile phones. So, and I was really wondering, wow, what exciting news that is, because this judge, he must either receive the Nobel Prize or, he should step down or something. But of course, the stories are never black and white. So maybe you can shed some light on that.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you had news about that, but that's one more example of a court decision that goes against the shared conditions on something that might possibly cause harm to our lives. So specifically, that case was much more complicated than that, and it was specifically a worker who has been exposed to high energy cell phones from the 70s or the 80s, I don't remember exactly. So I didn't cover personally the story, but that's a good example of a very complicated story that goes to court and ends up with a court decision that sounds to go against the scientific consensus. The potential harm associated to the use of cell phones is still unclear on some aspects. So it's reasonably, it is classified by one of the methods that is being used by the International Agency for Research on Cancer is looking at what has been published. Based on what has been published, there are several exposures, like drinking coffee and tea and so on, hot beverages, and eating meat that are possibly or probably capable of causing cancer.
But tell me something, please. Okay, I read about that story in Guardian and in Newsweek, and none of them actually mentioned the fact that that worker was exposed, for such a long time, that the telephone was really old, that was 80s or even early 80s.
He was spending a lot of his day inside the car, which made the conditions from the electromagnetic point of view very peculiar. So it was a very powerful telephone, an old one, because there were few cells, and it was a big older machine, and he was using the phone from the car. So there are several details that make that story very unusual in a way. And then there is a bigger picture that we have to deal with as science journalists. And I have been several times interviewing judges. There is a judge in Italy, his name is Amedeo Santosuoso, who created the center at the University of Pavia on the new technologies and law, exactly with the goal of helping judges and scientists talk to each other to come to a closer mutual understanding of the conditions. Because something that in the Italian legal system, you don't expect the judge, so the professional ethos of the judge is not to establish the scientific truth, it's to establish the legal truth of what happened to that specific individual in those specific circumstances, based on what has been brought into court by experts. And the selection of experts is always a controversial topic, because you have cases of totally unreliable experts who, from the point of view of the court, they have to be treated like honest citizens who present their knowledge.
So many different aspects this story actually opens up, isn't it? But one of them actually, okay, you are saying it's not a clear cut whether mobile phones are harmful or not. We of course debate this all the time. It's in media, scientists speak about it. But if the judge or if the court says something like this, rules something like that, and people don't usually read the small print, they will think, okay, the majority of science actually saying we don't know yet, we are not quite sure about that. So the science is put into a very weird position, like the position that, you know, is not supposed to be believed, is it?
Well, what I would say is that sometimes science doesn't have an answer. So the answer that the science can provide is not the answer to the question that comes from the citizens. So what the science says is based on the existing evidence. And based on the existing evidence, sometimes you have to say, we don't know. So specifically when it comes to health-related topics, there has been in the last 30 years a strong movement of the so-called evidence-based medicine that started looking into the methodology of clinical trials and how the previous knowledge was created. And what the methodologists ended up showing is that if you pool the results, if you look at just one clinical trial, you may say this is dangerous or this drug is working. And if you look at the whole literature that dealt with that same question, the answer might be, we don't know. And that's one of the big problems, that the scientists, when they are in the lab, they know that the most scientific answer sometimes is, I don't know. But then when a reporter comes to the door and says, do we know?
Yeah.
And we, as reporters, we have been pushing scientists to give a clear answer to complex questions. And maybe some scientists have learned too much to give an answer, a clear-cut answer, when the answer should be, well, let's open a discussion about that. So in the end, the problem is always to pretend that the existing answer fits the question, which is not a scientific question.
Okay, so you actually don't think that such court rulings do harm the position or the image of scientists, even though the majority of institutes and universities have never made direct link between the head tumor and mobile phone usage.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood exactly what the question was.
So you actually don't think that such rulings by the court do not actually harm the image of scientists, since, you know, there are very rare researches that actually claim there is direct link.
Well, that's specifically that's a very interesting and relevant case, also in another aspect. So it's very difficult to establish a strong relationship between an exposure and a specific damage. So there are very few cases where it is clear. We are, as citizens, everyone, I think, also scientists are exposed to the same kind of fallacy. I don't know how many of you watched the Hollywood movie, which was with about the pollution in the United States with
Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts.
I know that I can't. Who remembers the title? It was untypical role for her, was it?
Erin Brockovich.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much.
If you look at the movie, you end up believing that those cancers were linked to the exposure. Now we know that they were not. So science today tells us that whatever conclusion you could have reached, it is totally unlikely that all those different kinds of tumors were all related to the same kind of exposure along the years, or to the same kind of pollutant. So that's the kind of logic that we are pushed to assume. It's easy, you have water, polluted water, you have cancer, then you have a link. But when you look at the real epidemiology, it's much more complicated than that. You have to look for potential effects that are intermediate effects related to the development of cancer, and typically it is to some specific forms of cancer following the same pathway or similar pathways. And the same is with that kind of exposure. So we have one link to one benign tumor of the ear. And then we have studies that have been unable to come to a conclusion. And we have a lot of other confounding factors, they would be called in scientific terms. One of which is potential conflicts of interest. So whenever there is a new technology, you have big investments, and you have commercial interests, and you also have fully good faith hopes that 5G, for instance, which is the big new target of worries, is going to change our life for good. And as journalists, we always have to deal with promises of something that will change, a new drug which will cure everything. And as a journalist, you know that it's not going to be true. But then, if it's the topic of the day, you will end up covering it. And if the drug is approved, you're going to write about it. And so the goal of those who communicate, be them scientists or journalists, is always caught in the middle between the need to, in a way, side with what you think is going to improve our lives and so on. So the enthusiasm for science is good. And at the same time, we have a lot of reasons now to say that even science in good faith with very little commercial interests is often done not really up to the standards that are supposed to be applied.
And good journalists, good science journalists, of course, has to understand that. He almost has to be an expert to really realize everything that is going on, and that he understands what the, let's say, opposite party is trying to hide from you or conceal from the general public or journalists, whatever. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, tell us about your case. Did you study medicine so you can write stories about science, pharmacy, chemistry? How does it go?
That's a very, very good question. There has been for a lot of several decades debate inside the science journalism community, whether a scientific background was needed or favorable or helpful, or sometimes. And I don't have a scientific background at all. I learned on the job. And I also think that it is impossible to think that an individual has the knowledge to discuss in detail the scientific topics. So the goal of science journalism, in my view, is much more that of looking at science that may increase or decrease trust in people. One of the issues that, as a son of my father used to be a political journalist, my mother used to be a journalist as well, a cultural journalist. My great-grandfather was a journalist before being a politician.
So you only need sport in your family. Does anyone cover sport?
No, that's also why I'm a little bit obese. My vision is that the goal of journalism, even when it deals with science, is much more, has to deal much more with democracy than it has to deal with technical knowledge, technical skills or scientific knowledge itself. And that's one of the also bias that the journalism profession has to deal with today, which is typically to look for to mistrust, to look for something that smells bad, which is good in a way, but then it's hard to say where it makes sense in scientific controversies, because if you stop at the level of saying, for instance, look for the money, which is a typical way of saying, if you look for the money, okay, when it comes to science, nobody is innocent. Everyone has to fight for money. We are here, I think I have knowledge of the Italian evaluation agency. I've written about their problem with the methods for evaluating the quality of Italian researchers, of research done, and there is no objective way of saying that. And it will always have someone pointing the finger to conflict of interest of someone else, to lack of scientific basis for some decisions. And
but this is not actually only in science journalism, it's everywhere, isn't it? But then also, you also have this term investigative science journalism. Is this any different from just normal journalism?
You know, what could be a difference, in my view, that's absolutely true what you say. So that's typical of journalism. So the journalists are the watchdogs. If you, I don't know how many of you have a background in medicine, but there is a typical expression whenever you have a screening for an illness, for instance, you have to look for people with early forms of an illness. You have false positives and sometimes false negatives. So the journalism typically has the societal role of ringing the alarm more often than it is needed. So a healthy society can accept journalists to go off maybe a little bit too often.
I like that explanation. Thank you.
Because the opposite would be typically would open the way to oppressive societies. If you prefer not to be wrong and to preserve typically the power, then the power can profit from that. So it's a search for balance in a way.
But
coming to science, specifically, in my impression, because I did not conduct formal research on that, but my feeling is that one of the troubles of science is that the societal trust in science is decreasing. like it is towards all kinds of societal bodies, in a way. And one of the reactions of science is to basically paint science with the capital S. Like we are doing it for the sake of humanity. We are not doing that because we have to pay the bills at the end of the month. We are not doing that because we are ambitious and we want to win the Nobel Prize. We are doing that because we are missionaries for the good, the public good.
Aren't they? I still believe that.
Some are, but the system in our Western societies is pushing them to cut corners, to publish or perish, which is the expression used. And when you are there threatened with a gun at your head and to someone who tells you, are you willing to publish or perish? You will publish. Most of us will publish. Some will change their jobs and they will go into other avenues with their scientific skills. And some others will play by the rules. There are not
unwritten rules. Well, damaging rules.
Unwritten, but everyone knows them.
So you are talking about predatory journals, for instance. This is one of the aspects of what you were saying just now. I wouldn't think that, but from your article, I've learned there is about 8,000 predatory journals only in 2018, which seems quite
they
hard
are
to believe,
growing.
And they are growing. Yeah. So tell us, please. I'm sure that everyone here is well aware of the term predatory journal, but then if I think about certain Alan Chambers that you wrote about, that American researcher who was victim of predatory journal, maybe it's worth explaining what it is.
Well, there are several cases of good faith scientists who end up submitting a paper to a journal that is only looking for the money associated, because predatory journals are one of the side effects of the so-called open access movement. So in order to facilitate access to published research, the model of open access was introduced, and the idea is that you're not paying the subscription to the journal, but you're paying to publish your article. And this basically altered the balance that was created along the centuries in some publications, because now the pressure, once the editors and the peer reviewers and the publishers of the journals had several constraints, where I had a predefined number of pages, and I have to select what I'm going to publish, and I'm going for the best. It was not always the best. Sometimes, even in the past, there is literature that showed that it was the most also newsworthy. So it was fashionable and likely to end up on the dailies. So that also was one of the criterion used by traditional publishers. But with the introduction of the open access, the scientist was given the money. Instead of having money that a librarian would decide how to invest on subscriptions, it was the scientist who had his money. And it was kind of a naive person going to the market looking for the best opportunity for investing the money. With a lot of predators, that's the definition by a librarian, Jeffrey Beall, who established an unreliable list of predatory journals. Because the problem is that you could assume that you could recognize what makes a journal a predatory journal, but people who studied the topic ended up saying, we don't know. There is no shared, they made a meta-analysis of what had been published, and they ended up looking at scientific studies published in legitimate literature that were trying to say what makes a journal a predatory journal. And every researcher who tried to, typically you go there with your friend and you say, what makes a journal a predator? And you ask your people and you come up with a list. This is something that excludes your predator, this is something that makes you suspect this predator. And those who looked at all that was published ended up looking at a list of a lot of stuff that there was no coherence, there was no consistency between studies. So only a few months ago they came up with a definition of what is a predatory journal. And then you see that a lot of very famous, top-notch journals and publishing houses have several behaviors that are associated to predatory behaviors, like, for instance, manager insisting that, okay, we accepted your paper, why don't you pay for making it open access? And I have the experience of a top researcher, an Italian researcher in Switzerland, who I am in contact through Facebook, who had a paper accepted by Neurology, the Journal of the American Academy of Neurology. And he started explaining the hassle that they were giving him, because they said, one of your co-authors worked for an institution that requires open access. And he said, I don't care. He's one of my co-authors, but the money is mine. I am the first author and I don't need open access. And he didn't manage to get rid of that insisting people, because even the American Academy of Neurology, which of course has neurology on top of its goals, the science, for the sake of science, they hire people who is then probably measured on how effective they are in convincing scientists to publish, to provide publication fees for going open access, so to increase the revenue of the journal. Because journals are like the media in the newsstands, they are business operations in the end.
Okay, so now we have a definition. Where do we go from here? The number of predatory magazines is still growing. One would expect the scientist community themselves will try to somehow sort this out. I know this is probably a naive expectation. I'm not even sure.
I would like
the audience. I mean, has there been a serious big case involving the predatory journal in Slovenia? I can't remember that actually, but
I think it's ongoing.
Yeah.
And what I can tell you about the experience coming from the world of science, there is a very interesting experience in the Public Library of Science, which is at the start of the open access movement. A group of high-ranking and top-notch scientists joined forces on this new initiative to publish open access journals, which the first was PLOS, Public Library of Science. And then it was so successful that they started opening a lot of sub-specialty journals, PLOS Medicine, PLOS on several topics. And in the end, they started publishing a lot without any filter. Their ideology was, we look at the methodology. If the methodology is good, then it's good. And I had the opportunity once to discuss with one of the founders, top geneticist from the Sanger Institute in the UK, and I told him, but do you really think that the medical doctor needs a lot of new studies, or shouldn't he need a synthesis? Shouldn't he have someone helping him or her going straight to the message? Or do you expect the physician to have time to go through everything and make his own meta-analysis? They don't have time, and they have PLOS Medicine, and only at that point he realized that that kind of policy worked perfectly for genetics, and the more you add, the better it is.
So it is probably mainly your articles and other science journalist articles that actually warn about this situation. I'm not sure, does anyone have a question on that or opinion on predatory journals? If not, then...
Yeah, very well.
Prosim.
By some definitions, a list of predatory journals includes things like you mentioned, plus one, which nobody here from the scientific front will agree with. You know, these are reputable, good scientific journals. So maybe there's something wrong with the actual naming or definition of predatory journals. Maybe there is no such thing. You know, we don't think about sending our best work to no-name journals, which is probably where this definition started from.
Well, I can mention you an example. In a way, I perfectly agree with you. So it's a continuum. So we now speak about predatory journals because this librarian found this very effective definition. So this topic became a newsworthy kind of topic, something that we could all immediately be interested to. But the point is that there was another example, not close, but OncoTarget, for instance, was not Indian, not Chinese, it was an American publisher, and it was it was listed in the rising stars by the Thomson Reuters, which are the publishers of the Impact Factor. So the Impact Factor is another big, interesting topic to look at. Basically, the very same Thomson Reuters listed this journal among the rising stars of oncology, and then 1 year later they delisted it from Medline because it was predatory. And we don't know exactly what happened. They did not say it clearly, because of course if you write it down, and we know perfectly as journalists, if you say you are a thief, even if you are a thief, you can sue me and I end up in jail before a court goes into the detail. So OncoTarget was delisted, and a lot of reputable scientists who had published on OncoTarget found themselves pointed by finger like someone who publishes on predatory journals. But the point is that it's a continuum. There is no cutoff for defining what is the best behavior. And in general, you would expect that there was a pressure to be the best in whatever, from science. And when you look at the example from PLOS, that is not the case. So you end up accepting the rules of the trade, and this makes this is a problem, because even survival of the world of science, when you ask for money to politics, you are asked to promise results, and the politicians need to have something to promise taxpayers. So this is the general context. What I think is something that we could learn from is that exactly the scientists should try to do better science before deciding that they are entitled to do better publishing. Because that's my conclusion in the end. So when scientists turned publishers, and when scientists turned journalists, they could decide to learn, and they accept the rules and the context. And they only after they have accepted the context, they can try to make something better. Sometimes my impression is that they assume that it was easy to do better from scratch immediately. And PLOS is one of the examples, because they made a lot of money at some point, and then they also invested in wrong investments. So I know that they were responsible of increasing the number of publications of dubious value from the scientific.
So what happens to you if you publish in predatory magazine? I mean, can you lose money? Can you lose your prestige? Can you lose your scientific relevance? Can you?
Well, what
are the consequences?
In Italy, there was a recent study by an Italian group of three people with an Italian that looked at, going back to the agency where we are. I mean, in Italy it's going to be set up, but we have the evaluation agency. So part of the funding for research in Italy is distributed based on the score of the university. And the score of the university depends on the collective score of the professors, of the faculty. What happens is that if your evaluation was based on an article that is delisted, your score decreases. So basically your curriculum is not as valuable as it was previously. There was this study which was published on Science Policy, on a journal, respected journal last year, which looked at all the articles submitted by Italian researchers, university staff, professors, full professors, associate professors and researchers for the first evaluation exercise in 2012 in Italy. And it ended up showing that as much as 5% of those was listed on the publicly available Bill's list of predatory journals. So if you want, and still those publications were considered to be good enough from the point of view of the evaluators of the agency. So the agency itself was not up to date, and the researchers, when they were asked, why did you publish? Did you know? Some of them said, yes, I knew it was on the list. But my university asked me to publish, and it was on the list of the good journals from the point of view of ANVO, the National Agency of Evaluation.
Publish or perish.
So, publish or perish. And the scientists were there and they asked, should I look for a better journal? It's work, additional work. I can publish there, why not? And then they said, okay, yes, in retrospect, I'm sorry, I wouldn't do it again. But they did it in the first place because the pressure pushed them to do something that they knew was wrong.
Okay, it's hard pressure, but what is basically good to hear is that Italy is actually taking the predatory journals very seriously. It's a serious issue in Italy. Am I right? Or, I mean...
It starts to be because the societal pressure goes in the direction of...
So, let's sort it out. Let's not allow the predatory techniques to happen, yeah? But because I have so many other questions for you, we can't stay just with predatory journals. I recently read that your government is planning to create independent national research agency. I think this is an important question. It would be good to hear something about that, of course. Maybe you can tell us, if you don't have that already, so how does it work in Italy? Who decides on, what gets funded? Is it directly politicians or, I don't know?
It's a typical Italian mess. Well, I've been covering for the British journal, which is called Research Professional News. I've been covering research policy and university for the last 2 years. And I looked for experts capable of telling me exactly what are the sources of funding. And every time I thought I had found an expert, and I had a complete list, then after a couple of months I got some news about another small amount of money coming out from a different ministry with a different name tag, maybe because it used to be there in previous years, but then for a few years it was not there, and then they got it back. So it was totally unpredictable, and so for scientists it's always also a mess. So part of the funding comes from the ordinary funding for universities. Then there are traditional sources of funding, like PRIM, for instance, progetti di ricerca di interesse nazionale, national interest research projects, which is a big amount of money that for a few years was totally reduced to a very small amount. And at some point it was announced, and they are still, some research groups are still waiting for the money from 2017, for instance, because it's called 2017, and it was announced then, or maybe it was announced in 2018, so it was totally irrational and unpredictable. What the goal would be
to have something like we have in Slovenia?
Of the new, exactly. The goal would be to get in par with Slovenia and to
I'm
have...
sure you will hear some about it today and tomorrow, so I don't want to be... Yeah.
The question at this point is that the law that was approved has assigned a little funding for this year and much more funding for next years, and has set the basic rules for selecting the board. They didn't really say clearly what will be or should be the procedure for selecting the board. So every minister...
Deliberately, of course.
The ministry, all the ministries that had some even very small amount for research, whatever called, has now the right to name their representative in the board. So the fear is that they will represent politics instead of representing the scientific community, because that's a risk in Italy. I am still trying, I deal with my editors in the UK. In the UK there is much more tradition of institutions dealing with this kind of matters. So you have experts who have, as a job, they are up to date on what's happening in the government, at what step is the project for the National Research Agency. My editor keeps asking me, can we have a story on the new research agency? Because the law was approved in December. Yesterday I contacted a friend of mine who was on the board of the Agency of Evaluation, because she is much more knowledgeable. I mean, at least know from her, do you know if there is someone in charge? And basically, especially because it's not a responsibility directly of the Ministry for Research, because recently in Italy the Minister for University and Research resigned, and so in December, early in January, the ministry was split. University and research and education on the other side. So, but on top of that, it's so many ministries that are involved, and she was explaining me several steps that still before looking into the research agency, the government will have, the Ministry of Research in this case, will have to select the new members of the ARRS,
so
because they expired. So there are so many bureaucratic steps in the middle that it's a mess. But basically the idea would be that there was a movement from the scientific community asking for an agency for research, because we are one of the few countries that don't have it.
It looks like it's going to take years.
I want to be, as I was telling you earlier, I'm trying to be, I was never patriotic, but I'm trying to be optimistic until bad news come. So I changed my attitude because I think that in this period we have to give a little bit of leeway to the few maybe good willing people who are trying hard to make a good job. And so I want to wait, but I know that there are so many different persons involved that it will certainly take time. But the idea would be exactly to have an intermediate body in charge of deciding the political lines along which then the criteria that are usually applied to the quality of research, which are totally unreliable, but basically are the metrics that we were discussing earlier based on the literature. Those methods at least should be temperated in a way, so attenuated by a political decision. We should invest in, I'm curious to know what happens here in Slovenia, but I assume that basically there is a decision to split part of the budget to that kind of goals
Yeah,
and research.
I'm sure you'll get a chance to ask maybe Lab over there or some other people. I would like to talk a little bit about communicating the science, and there is another great example. I mean, I guess you all heard of about this Italian scientist, once little-known professor called Roberto Burioni, virologist, who became totally famous because he sort of stood up against all those people who are saying that vaccination is really harmful and damaging, and he became totally famous, not only in Italy, everyone is writing about him, in America, in Britain, in Europe, all over Europe. Maybe I could just explain briefly what he did. He was invited to the public television, to the Rai talk show, and he was there. He did not know that he will have to speak with a former DJ and an actress, so not with the people who had any kind of medical background. And basically the TV host gave a lot of airtime to the actress and DJ. Please don't laugh, as if this is familiar to you as well. And in the end, the host turned to virologist saying, so what do you think about vaccination? And he said, I have the quote ready. He said, because he realized he only has 30 seconds left, and he was saying, the earth is round, gasoline is flammable, and vaccines are safe and effective. All the rest are dangerous lies. And it went like a bomb all over Italy, and he became famous immediately, as I was saying. But our friend here, Fabio, is of course enthusiastic because the guy is successful, but at the same time you have warning about such approach, don't you?
Well, I must say that Burioni was invited on TV because he had been publishing on Facebook long explanations on vaccines, so he had started his own kind of a hobby to his increasing audience of enthusiasts. But when I first saw, I was not watching TV, but I found it on retrospect the following days. I immediately had the impression that he would be very effective. But I was raised as a medical journalist in a context where the point was no vaccine is like another vaccine. There is nothing that has zero side effects. There is nothing that is 100% effective. So I was raised as a journalist, as a responsible journalist, to look at the nuance every time, to look at the shades of gray and of color. So it had already happened to me very often to talk about vaccines with pediatricians and with clinicians who don't know as much as researchers do about vaccines. I grew up in the context of the evidence-based medicine movement and the International Cochrane Network for evidence-based in medicine, and the point was always to counter the pressure to introduce new drugs, introduce new vaccines, long before we had evidence of effectiveness. Also because everyone knows that pharmakon in ancient Greek means venom, because that's kind of Hippocrates 1.0.
So again,
so the kind of message was very polarizing, and it was, of course, it was in that context. He was the good guy. Of course, he was right if you had to take sides. But for someone like me, raised in a context where informed consent was the guiding principle, and we were trying to educate physicians, because I started as a medical journalist in a weekly magazine for general practitioners. Tempo Medico. Sapere was before that, but then I came to Milan and I was working in Tempo Medico, which is the oldest medical journal. It doesn't exist anymore, alas. And we were basically trying to introduce in the communication, in the journalism, technical journalism for physicians, the message that if a pharmaceutical representative comes to you with the latest study praising a new drug, you should not only look at the latest study, you should look at the whole, and not only to that drug, but also to the non-pharmacological alternatives, what could be done instead of giving an expensive pill with a global vision.
But Fabio,
so in that specific case, Burioni was very, very effective because he created kind of factions. And he was identified like the good guy fighting anti-vax. And a lot of good faith physicians kind of found, oh, finally there is someone saying the right thing. And they did not realize that he was, yes, saying the right thing, but he was saying it in a tone and in a way that was amplifying, it was increasing.
It was harsh, it was offensive sometimes, so
yes.
it increased the split.
It was very, he started mocking people asking questions.
Okay, but I have
that's
another interesting quote, which I really like. So, because he was saying somewhere, like to those who dispute medical advances, he was saying, go and have a root canal without anesthetics. And basically, he was the one who was actually also standing up for scientists. Like he was saying to people, look, you've spent 5 minutes checking virology on internet, and I am studying it and researching it for 35 years, and you come to me saying you don't have a clue? We are actually coming back to where we began our discussion. I mean, I don't have a feeling that scientists today are still closed in a sort of ebony tower. They have to communicate and everything. But at the same time, they are exposed to very offensive remarks, campaigns coming from uninformed public.
And then in that specific case, I think that something that is relevant and that did not, there was a long profile on Science magazine on Burioni. And I was quoted in, I had a long conversation with the author, and I'm not satisfied very much, but I understand that, I mean, even Science magazine has its own kind of
ups and downs.
I mean, they are editorial, strong editorial stance. So they have decided since the beginning that he's a hero of science. And so they accepted our minority opinions, mine and of a couple of other science journalists.
You are right. 3 journalists, 1 sentence.
And that's much more than other journals would have done. So,
but I have another question.
But just to close going back to science, he pretended to be speaking on behalf of science, even after closing conversation with scientists who were as qualified as he is and more knowledgeable of aspects like vaccination campaigns, because public health has little to do with virology. So he's a virologist and immunologist, and he can tell you technically how much it works and up to what points every specific vaccine. But then you have public health experts who may have as many PhDs or many more, and everything stronger from the scientific point of view than his own career, and he didn't accept criticism from them either. And at some point he became, how can I say, a kind of more communicator than scientist, still pretending to be speaking the word of science. And that's why I personally think that everything he's being given much more credit, also because he decided that every improvement in the situation, everyone went to him and said, so it's time to your campaign. And he said, yes, of course, mine and my friends instead of recognizing that public health is much more a complex issue and that there were many more social actors who were, so the situation was not as bad as he depicted it in the first place, and it was not thanks to him that at some point everyone recognized that it was not as bad and it was improving. One of the criticisms was you are making it much bigger than it is, so there is a risk, but there are professionals already tackling the risk of epidemics, of measles specifically. So there was in a way, at some point, he became the maverick who decided that he knew more than the rest of scientific disciplines.
Okay, but Fabio, he has an approach. I agree with you, and I got this point from this article as well, actually. So, you know, that is actually in this crazy world where you have 20 seconds and not 20 minutes to discuss one object. In this case, he is doing something right, and we live in this world. Okay, I'm an old-fashioned journalist. I like people explaining, and I like that, and I think it's good and everything. But the world doesn't go this way, so we are dying out our sort of species. So, do you think that scientists, anyway, should be a little more populistic? Not the way Matteo Salvini, a little bit more populistic like Burioni, just to sort of explain the relevance of what they do to the public much more effectively as they presently do.
Yes, but I know at the same time that it is very
dangerous.
Complicated. I can tell you a funny story. Several years ago I organized a panel at a conference in Florence of PCST, which is the Public Communication of Science and Technology International Group. And in that panel I invited the head of the Science Media Center. In the UK they have the Science Media Center since the early 2000s, which deals exactly with working with scientists and with journalists and teaching scientists to do better communication and teaching journalists to communicate better science in a way. Often they put them in the same room to discuss on controversial topics. And in addition, I managed to bring on that panel the newly named Chief Scientific Advisor to President Barroso at the time.
When he was President of the European Commission.
When he was the President of the European Commission, at some point there was this figure that did not exist in the European institutions, the Chief Scientific Advisor, which comes from the tradition of the Anglo-Saxon countries. And she is a microbiologist, Scottish, a very bright scientist. And she was on the panel and she told this story, that when she was Chief Scientific Advisor in her own country, she had just got home after a long press conference where she had to deal with the tabloid journalist asking about something, and she was kind of very tired. She was relaxing with her husband, having a glass of wine and then a second glass of wine, and she had taken off the shoes and she was relaxing. At some point the telephone rings, and it's the Prime Minister asking her why she was insisting that there was no scientific answer, clear scientific answer, and she keeps insisting about uncertainties, about specific cases, and so on and so forth. And she was very funny when she told this. She said, well, I was 15 days before my term expired. And the Prime Minister said, can't you just find one scientific truth that will not be questionable, that will not be questioned? She said, yeah, maybe I can, there's one that I can tell you. There is nothing that goes faster than light. And she said a few days later the CERN announced that they had found superluminal neutrinos. That was the kind of huge mistake by the research group. But basically she was there like, I can't believe it. And even that, was subject, because that's science, and that's another big interesting story. The huge mistake by Antonio Ereditato, the particle physicist of CERN, who, against part of his colleagues, decided to announce that they had observed and measured neutrinos that could travel faster than light. But apart from the funny story, the point is exactly that when you need to establish a trust relationship with journalists, you need to recognize that your limits. And whenever you say that something is 100% certain, you're not behaving as a scientist. So that's the real point. So the problem is, of course, scientists need to communicate. I will tomorrow show a lot of evidence from the scientific literature that communicating with the media itself, it has become a way to increase your career chances. So there is quite old now, a study published on the New England Journal of Medicine in 1991 that shows that when the New York Times published a story on a leading research article published on the New England Journal of Medicine, so you're talking about the top daily in the US and the top clinical journal in the US. So already the New England Journal of Medicine is supposed to publish the best clinical research. But then in the 1978, I think, there was for 2 months, a strike of the printers of the New York Times. So they had this perfect natural experiment, because the journalists kept working and kept selecting the research published in the New England Journal of Medicine for the Science Times supplement coming out every Tuesday. Except that for 2 months it was only for the record. So it was in the archive of the New York Times and it was not printed and distributed. There was no internet. So they had this perfect control group. And when you ask, does the chick or the egg, who comes first, in that specific case, the assumption was, of course, the New England Journal of Medicine publishes the top research. The best research is then clearly recognizable. The New York Times speaks about the best research, and so there is no surprise that those that are mentioned in the New York Times also have more citations in the following research published in the medical literature. And instead, what they saw is that in the 2 months when the New York Times did not reach the newsstands or the subscribers because it was not printed, the very same set of research articles had many less citations in the scientific literature. So the conclusion of this sociologist was, if you manage to get your research on the New York Times, your credibility within your scientific community, who is supposed to be the best placed to say whether or not your research deserved to be cited in the first place. But then, if it went through the New York Times, then it is cited much more. Okay. And that has been, how can I say, exploited more and more in the following years. In terms of investment to influence media to speak about specific research, which was also kind of positive feedback into more research funding because you have more credibility, stronger scientific curriculum, and so on.
I didn't know that story about New York Times, but it's a good case. But what about the opposite? Okay, we realize why it is important for scientists to communicate with the public, journalists, general public. But what about scientists? I mean, you know, last year, when Pulitzer Award winner Deborah Bloom was here, and she was sitting in your chair, basically. She was saying that for some of her investigative work, she spends about 6 months, 6-7 months, not only for investigation, but for double checking, for deciphering the documents, trying to understand what is going on, to talking to the people, to writing as accurate as possible. In Slovenia, I don't know a media outlet who can actually afford to do that. I'm not sure what is it like in Italy, but my question is, so how do you attract young people, journalists, that they will dedicate their time, and how do you motivate them to do the science stories?
By paying them enough.
Okay.
No, I'm half joking. You mentioned Deborah Blum and the Night Science Journalism program.
She's well paid, yes.
I had the luck to be selected to be one of their fellows, so I was invited to spend 1 year in Cambridge, and they gave me
scholarship,
good salary for basically attending a few events organized by the program and then attending classes whenever I wanted, and I had a lot of time to think about where my profession was going. Of course, in the United States, there is a stronger tradition in journalism, in investigative journalism at large, so also in investigative science journalism. And then you have a lot of foundation money for grants, so many, in recent years, many of the most expensive investigations. For instance, there was a very wonderful investigation based on data in the US, which was called Dollars for Dogs, which was in the end published by the New York Times, showing how much money was given to doctors and how that money given by pharmaceutical companies to doctors affected their prescriptions. And it was made by ProPublica, which is an endeavor that was created thanks to foundation money. Even the New York Times benefited from them, because at some point the work was done and they needed to make it as widely available as possible. So there are a lot of experiments of pairing, grant programs offering money. So they are run by people with experience in journalism, and they distribute money based on a proposal, a little bit like it happens with research money in a way, with the difference that in that case you, as a journalist, you have to pitch, propose a story, and also demonstrate that you will be able to publish it somewhere with a wide distribution. And of course, that's a little bit the same problem that is there for research, which is in Italy we suffer dramatically of underfunding, chronic underfunding. So when you have a system that is chronically underfunded, and you have only few opportunities for getting specific funding on specific projects, you will have a few capable people who can manage, who can jump from one grant to another while paying their bills with maybe a side job. In a context where in Italy, the general level, I mean, whenever there is a story on a daily or a weekly, the first attitude is, let's see where they got it wrong this time. You don't assume that they are telling you what happened. You assume that they are distorting something because they didn't get it, and because there is not a basic culture assuring. So you are surprised when there is a very good story on the traditional media, and there are several new starting media trying to find their sustainability. But every time you do an investigative story, you go against someone. And there is another example that you were mentioning earlier about a big case in Italy on stem cells and Vannoni. And I wrote a story on Vannoni for the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, when I was their correspondent. And they didn't want it, because basically they said there is too much a risk based on the British law that they would sue us for libel. And those were the years when there was a kind of libel tourism. So people had waited for someone to write to have a pretext to go to a British court, because the libel laws were very much in favor of people who wanted to hide something, let's say. So they were very much even against science. So there was a big campaign in the UK. And the point was that, yeah, I published my story on the weekly Panorama, a very short part, and there was basically no reaction. If the BMJ had published the same investigation,
it would be
maybe a few years before Vannoni became famous, they could have had some...
it would have had impact, your article. Do we have 30 seconds, just for the final? 30 seconds. The climate change. I have to ask this question because I'm intrigued by it. As a journalist, I'm intrigued by the way we journalists approach the issue. Can you give us just really brief, because we have to end now, sort of diagnosis, or how do we do our work regarding the climate change? Is our reporting okay? Is it, are we totally missing the points? Are we making it catastrophic or not catastrophic enough?
And I don't have an answer. So I know that there is the debate going on since a long time. There are some colleagues in the UK, for instance, who decided to start using specific wording because they think that it's the only way to be clearly understood, and they tend to use very dramatic language. I am not sure. I think that one of the basic rules of journalism is trying to resonate with your audience, which in the era of social media, it's quite paradoxically more complicated than it used to be previously, because you first resonate with the social media and then with everything else. But basically, my impression is that there is no single public. So depending on, and that's the only maybe
I was talking about
basic
mainstream media, basically. I was talking about mainstream media, of course, you know.
Yeah, but there are mainstream, in Italy I can think of different mainstream media that have a different average audience. So Il Corriere della Sera doesn't have the same readers as Il Fatto Quotidiano, for instance. So there is a kind of, in recent years, in my perception in Italy, there is much more a selection of, also favored by social media. We tend to look for news sources that tell us what we want to listen. So that's the kind of selection mechanism that was improved without, we realized it by the social media. So the more and more we tend to only speak with those who give us what we like to hear, basically. And that's why it's very difficult to talk about vaccines to people who are on the other side, to say so, and also to talk about climate change, because climate change is something that affects every aspect of our daily lives, and there is nobody who is doing the right thing. Every one of us is finding her or his personal, how can I say, compromise with what we know we should do and what we manage to do on our daily life under pressure and so on. So the risk is that the kind of journalism that gives, how can I say, that punishes, like Brioni, and says, how can you say this, you're stupid. That's not. The only perception that I have is that you always have to look for a dialogue. And to speak to those who are potentially willing to change their mind. The risk is to speak to those who are, for ideological reasons or for commercial reasons, they are not anyway changing their mind in any case. And that's the kind of risk that I think, why I think that the case of Brioni might be a case study. Because he's always speaking to those who already think like he does, so he's not helping anyone to change their minds, and instead he's increasing the gap between the camps. And that's something that...
Which is not constructive. It doesn't lead to
and in order to become constructive, you have, I think, to go through the mutual recognition of reciprocal limits. So the scientist who pretends to speak for science typically is someone that doesn't have my trust at first. Okay. Because I know that science doesn't exist. You have a lot of different disciplines and you have a deep knowledge of something, and you often are, you know, less than I do on some other aspects of equally important science. And that often basically that's one of the problems. That for a scientist to assume...
So climate change also has the same...
in Italy, some of the strongest public opponents of the message about climate change are scientists. That's dramatic. And they are in good faith. Mm-hmm. And so you don't know. If you use the Brioni language, you would say that they are stupid, they don't understand, they should study, instead of looking on Google. But they're not looking on Google, they are scientists, they are physicists, and still they say something that is totally anti-scientific.
Yeah, but where does that leave us? So, should I keep going on recycling my plastic bags, or should I just leave it? You know what I mean? The practical questions are...
Well, just to tell you, I contributed to organize the World Conference of Science Journalists. Today in Trieste, I was with some colleagues who attended the World Conference, and they still had their metal bottle that was one of the gadgets of the conference with the logo, the beautiful logo, a SIG bottle. And I was thinking to do the same in Trieste, because that's one of the symbols of let's do something. Except that a few weeks ago I read a story which basically said, okay, in order to make that aluminum bottle less polluting than the existing alternatives, you should use it for 7 years. Something like that. Wow. So we have a collection of bottles because that's a way for telling ourselves that we're doing something. And I think that the role of scientists is to say, wait, are you sure? And the role of journalists is exactly the same on a different, on a side perspective, but it's always the same, which is to question certainties and to say, it would be good if it were this, but I'm not sure. Let's look into it. And let's find scientists who accept to help in that.
Okay, let's end up with this message. Yeah, let's not believe the first guy who comes around and tells us whatever. Sorry, it was not 30 seconds, Jadranka. But, you know, in spirit of everything what Fabio says, you know, I think it was the right thing to do. So, thank you so much, Fabio, for